Saludo, mi gente. My name is Sid Wilson, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility. It's a great honor and privilege to be speaking to you on this platform. I want to commend the We Are All Human Foundation, my dear friend Claudia Romo Edelman, and her team for putting together this Hispanic Promise Summit together. And looking forward to our continued collaborations. We've been collaborating for many years. In fact, it was ACED and We Are All Human Foundation when we were both at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland in 2018 that I actually first got to know Claudia. 1 year later in 2019 is when we went back, very structured with a Hispanics forum at the World Economic Forum, and thus became the birth of the Hispanic Promise. And so I'm really happy to see how it has grown over these years. And again, my hats off to the We All Human Foundation and my dear friend Claudia Romo Edelman. I want to talk to you about ACED. And talk to you about something that's very unique that we do, which is our Corporate Inclusion Index. But what is the ACED Corporate Inclusion Index, and why is it so important to the work that ACED does, and why it's so important within the Hispanic inclusion movement, the diversity and inclusion movement, the movement to create a culture of belonging in corporate America when it comes to Hispanics. Let me talk about just some of the key things that are common in our findings. We know from an employment standpoint that Latinos are grossly underrepresented in the C-suite and on corporate boards. In fact, if you're a Latina, it's significantly low. It's about 1% of C-suite positions are held by Latinas. Even fewer that are serving on Fortune 500 corporate boards. That number is simply unacceptable, because when you look at not only Latina buying power and Latina gross domestic product, you will see that Latinas, and I'm not talking about just Latinos, I'm talking about just Latinas alone. If Latinas were your own economy, you would be a G20 country. You would probably be somewhere around anywhere from 11th to the 13th largest economy in the world. Latinas. Because if you take Latinos, all of us, we're about the 8th largest economy in the world, and that's based on a study from our good friends at the Latino Donor Collaborative. But when you aggregate some of those data, including our missing pieces report that ACED does every other year with our partnership with the Alliance for Board Diversity, our friends at the Executive Leadership Council, Catalyst, LEAP, and of course ACED, we know that only about 3.5% of all Fortune 500 board seats are held by Latinos. Less than 1% are held by Latinas. But then when you look at the other pillars, procurement, we know that supplier diversity is an area where we still do not get our fair share of supplier diversity initiatives. And this is where we know corporate America must do better, not only with tier 1 supplier diversity, but also tier 2 supplier diversity. And that's why working with great organizations, including within our coalition, we have the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, that we must do more so that corporations can have a stronger policy when it comes to its procurement and supplier diversity initiatives. Philanthropy, this is one that is still a major challenge. Latinos do not get their fair share of philanthropic dollars based on our measurements, and on top of that is that still many companies don't fully measure all of their philanthropic hours, including how much time their employees are spending volunteering on a variety of initiatives. And so this is something that needs to be done more so that so that companies can fully measure and understand where are they in terms of their philanthropy back into the community, making sure that that those Hispanic organizations that are doing the work at the local, regional, national levels are receiving the support because of the fact that we are a impactful and we're an economically influential community. And then so I mentioned employment, procurement, philanthropy, and then last I mentioned governance. I talked about that with the lack of Hispanics on corporate boards. This is something that needs to be done, but this is the work that we do in encouraging companies to take the ASED Corporate Inclusion Index. We certainly encourage every company to take this. It's an important tool. It's going to help you move the needle when it comes to advancing Hispanic inclusion at your company. Let me just end my remarks by sharing this important information as to why corporations not only should be involved with ASED, but should be involved with many of our Hispanic partners, be involved with the We Are Human Foundation, be involved with so many organizations that are working hard to really make our United States of America a better country, a more inclusive country, a country that is more welcoming and more belonging for us. And that is this. So when Claudia Romo Edelman and I were at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Claudia Romo Edelman and I had the privilege of really sharing some of our thought leaderships when it comes to why corporations should be doubling down on Latinos in corporate America, even greater than your globalization strategy. Because I want you to think about this and really, really think about this. If you're a company, or if this is your company and you're thinking about your globalization strategy, and I name you a country that has the following statistics: 8th largest economy in the world, dollar denominated, so you don't have the currency risk, that is in a low interest rate and low inflation rate environment, so you don't have the inflation risk, that is AAA rated, so you don't have sovereign debt risk, that is in a strong regulatory and political environment, so you don't have the legislative or governance risks, that is English dominant, whose average age is 27, and whose mode age, meaning the age that's the most popular among the age, is 11, that is growing faster than every single G20 country in the world, and that's growing faster than a sizable number of developing countries in the world. My question would be, would you invest in a country like that? Of course, everyone in Davos says, of course. I just described to you the US Latino community. We are that influential globally. And that is why it is important for corporations to recognize not only our current economic power, but our growing economic influence to come that is going to be outpacing the growth of every single developed country in the world, and is outpacing on a risk-adjusted basis many developing countries in the world. And yet, we still don't see corporate America doing enough to really think about how they can harness the growing Latino community in the areas of employment, procurement, philanthropy, and governance. That is why you need to get involved with organizations like the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility. That is why it is important that you take our ASED corporate inclusion index so that you know how you're moving the needle when it comes to advancing Hispanic inclusion at your company. It's also why it's important that you should be collaborating and working and supporting so many of our Hispanic organizations, including the We All Human Foundation and many others, because together we are making a difference. Together, si se puede, mi gente, as our civil rights leader Dolores Huerta would say. And so I just want to end by saying muchas gracias to all of you for your commitment. Thank you for your support of not only the work that all of our organizations do, but also what you're looking to do by being here and recognizing the importance of Hispanic inclusion. Again, my big thanks to the We All Human Foundation. Thank you to Claudia Romo Edelman. Thank you to all of you as participants. And together, si se puede. And on behalf of the ACED Board of Directors and my dedicated staff, we're here for you. Again, our website is www.hacr.org. And we hope that you connect with us really soon. Thank you very much. And pa'lante, mi gente.
Hello, I'm Jesus Mantas, and I am delighted to be here with you in the first Hispanic Promise Summit. My section is going to be to talk about what we call the Hispanic Talent Advantage. And this is a study that we did last year to really try to understand not only what is the gap in Hispanics in the leadership, but what is it that has made those that are in the leadership successful, and how can we learn from that to scale? It is a study that was performed as a partnership between We Are All Human and IBM through the IBM Institute for Business Value, which is the thought leadership arm of IBM. And we did two things. One is we did a survey that included over 1,200 Hispanics and over 3,800 non-Hispanics, just to make sure that we would have a contrast on diverse perspectives from both the ally perspective and the Hispanic perspective. And once we had all that data, we did something that we called a Hispanic Gem, which was nearly 1,000 Hispanics actually collaborated online for 2 days to really go deeper in some of the findings of these studies. Just to set the context, and you have seen this before, but I think it is very useful to always repeat the context of the importance of Hispanics to the United States economy and to the United States society. We're 1 in 5 people in this country. We're nearly 25% of the GDP growth. We have represented 75% of the labor force growth. We're the youngest part of the population. 6 in 10 Hispanics are younger than 35 years old. And with all of this strength, we're only 4% of leadership in the corporations. That is what we call the leadership gap. When we look at this study, we really set up the study to understand what are those key factors that have successfully supported professional advancement for Hispanics. What are those factors that have held people back? Specifically, what is the impact of discrimination? What is the personal experience? What is the perceptions that play into this journey? And what we call the gap within the gap within the gap, which is how female Hispanics and Latinx actually, have a double whammy in terms of the gap. They have a challenge because they're female, and they have a challenge because they're Hispanic. And when they put the two of them together, I think they're a special group that we need to look at. So with all of this discussion, 3 main areas of challenges come very clear to the surface. I will start at the top, what we call the opportunity challenge. We mentioned, the baseline is, 18.5% of Hispanics in the population, 4% are in the executive level of the corporations. That's the leadership gap. For those that actually benefited, that actually arrived to that, 41% of them say we've really benefited from mentorship. But then when we ask the junior managers in those same companies, only 1 in 4, 26% to be exact, say that they actually have access to that mentorship. So on one side, almost half of the executives that have made it say mentorship was very important. And on the other side, the people on that pipeline say only 1 in 4 have access to that mentorship. Second area, discrimination challenge. It may not be a surprise to many of us, but it is a big surprise to our allies. The fact that in this survey, 87% of Hispanics actually said they had personally experienced some level of prejudice because of their race. That is basically 9 in 10 people. And when you look at the early part of the pipeline, at those Hispanic junior managers, 7 in 10 say that they truly believe that they have to work harder because of their identity and being Hispanics. Third one, as I mentioned, the gap within the gap is 78%, 8 in 10 Latinas cite gender discrimination as a problem. And think about that. When you ask the same question to white female, only 67% say that. And we actually asked one of the polls that we did in the Jam was quite shocking. 82% of the participants actually said they don't believe that Latinas get the credit and the respect that they deserve. Let me dive down a little bit on some of these findings. So let's talk about this point of discrimination. The interesting thing is, many people would say, okay, we know about race-based discrimination, but the interesting point of this study is that it highlights that discrimination seems to be perceived more uniquely by Hispanics than other races in the United States. And you can see the statistics. When we ask the question, discrimination based on race or ethnicity, 88% of the Hispanics believe that they're being discriminated. 60% of underrepresented minorities, non-Hispanics, say that. And of course, 0% of the baseline of whites say that they're discriminated based on race or ethnicity. Second one is on topics like, put aside ethnicity. How about accent, language, speech pattern, right? Again, you see the range. Hispanics, 63%, non-Hispanics, 43%, and whites, 15%. And then the last one, it was an interesting one. One of the questions was, how about perception of discrimination based on looks or body type? So being discriminated because of the way they look. Also, Hispanics raised at the top of that list, 58% Hispanics, 48% non-Hispanics, 29% whites. Let's talk about mentoring, this point that we talked before on mentoring. The interesting thing, there's two very important points that I would highlight on this area. One is this idea of sponsorship versus mentoring, or some people call it advocacy versus mentoring. And great dialogue in the Jam about that. But, the best way to capture it is I think this quote that we have here that came from one of the Jam participants that said, mentors talk to you, sponsors talk about you. We pick our mentors, sponsors pick us. Very profound in the area that the majority of the Hispanics, those that actually have mentors, they have mentors, but that doesn't mean they have sponsors, right? So you can see the statistics. In terms of sponsorship and the perception of sponsorship, whites, 39% of them will say, yep, I have sponsorship in my career. Underrepresented minorities, non-Hispanics, 26%, Hispanics, 22%. So again, Hispanics have less sponsorship, not only than whites, but also other underrepresented minorities. How about formal mentorship or informal mentorship? Well, you can see the numbers for yourself. Clearly the trend is the same. More presence in whites, least presence in Hispanics, and then the other underrepresented minorities somewhere in between. Next one, I mentioned the gap within the gap. This concept of stacked biases is really eye-opening. A couple of statistics that I will mention here. One you can see there. One is 86% of Hispanics women experience discrimination because of being Hispanics. And as I mentioned before, that is more than any other women. But the pay gap is very interesting. There's a clear point on gender pay gap. But that gender pay gap is not equally distributed for women across all of the ethnicities. The fact of the matter is Latinas are the point at which that pay gap is the widest. So Latinas are paid 45% less than a white man doing the same job. But frankly, they're also paid 30% less than a white woman doing the same job. So clearly, it's not just gender that is impacting them. It is gender and being Latinas, being Hispanic. Another very interesting point that came both in the study but also on the JAM was this point that there are thousands of programs. There are like a lot of organizations that, a lot of these facts are known and they're trying to do something about it, but many of those programs fail. And the reason why many of those programs fail is because they tend to be very homogeneous programs. They're programs that pretend that Hispanics or the Latino population is one thing. On one side, one of the questions that we ask is, well, what do we think is the definition of success for Latinos and Hispanics? What does it mean? And the interesting thing is you can see that, if you take the average, 39% would say financial security, same amount would say creating positive change, and just kind of like almost tied, maintaining personal integrity, right? But here's when you actually drill down, I said, well, let's just break that out. If you're a senior executive Hispanic, what is success for you versus if you're at the beginning of that pipeline, junior Hispanic manager, what is success for you? You can see it's a very different answer. So the values, the definition of success is very different, and any programs that these communities are going to adopt is really going to have to be catered to the fact that they have different perspectives, right? Senior leaders creating positive change and integrity and being healthy is at the top. Junior managers, financial security is at the top. You see, it's not even mentioned in the Hispanic leaders because that's not an issue for them, right? Owning a home, really important for junior Hispanic managers, and earning respect from peers is really important, right? You see, it doesn't say anywhere here is like having mentoring. It doesn't actually say that. Definition of success is very different. Having mentoring becomes a mean to an end to achieve this definition of success. As we try to address these gaps, we have to do it with personalized programs that really meet Hispanics where they are. And different Hispanics and different Latinos are in different journeys based on their culture and based on their different, position where they are. And the most successful programs are going to be those that really become very personalized for those audiences. So what do we do with all of this? What is the call to action? All of us here in this summit, we have signed the Hispanic Promise. And that is a noble thing to do. But what we are coming up with as part of this study is saying, that is a noble thing to do and a good thing to do. It's necessary, but not sufficient. That is not going to change the status quo. It's not going to make a big impact. Things that are going to make a big impact. The first one is making Hispanic leadership representation an actual business priority of the company, of the teams, of the leaders, of the units. And what that means is that it gets tracked in the same way that many of us every week and every month, and definitely every quarter, if you're a public company, you're looking at your revenue growth, and you're looking at your profit, and you're looking at the growth, and you're looking about your clients. Well, you need to be looking at Hispanic representation. Next is, working on the pipeline. Identifying a leadership pipeline is really important if we want to make sure that we're going to have more Hispanic leaders, right? So it's not going to happen by itself. We have to really work on the pipeline. And then moving the needle from not only the mentoring and the training programs, but moving the needle towards advocacy really is very important. Second area is we really have to stay on this point of preparing Hispanics for the future work. Hispanics are over-indexed in the services sector of the economy and under-indexed in areas like technology and the future of the jobs. And those sectors are not only the ones that are the most affected by pandemic, as we have all seen, but they're also going to be most affected by automation. So, we really need to make sure that not only the entry level, as we're doing in the case of IBM, we've been working with BTEC, and make sure that we have the entry level significant amount of education and preparation of Hispanics, but we're going to have to retrain a significant amount of Hispanic adults as well. Because there's going to be more losses of job in the services side, more creation of jobs in areas like technology, and we're going to have to work on that. So really make sure that entry level, we've really shifted them. Really work on public-private partnerships to develop this, skills as a skill for adults as well. And at the end of the day, is one thing that I would advocate for everybody here is shifting to make decisions based on degrees, to make decisions based on skills. So we should be hiring for skills, not hiring for degrees. And then last that I mentioned is this idea of really design programs and interventions for the heterogeneity of the Hispanic population. The Latin population is not one thing. The Hispanic population is not one thing. It's a mosaic of cultures. We need to be very intentional, and the way in which we communicate, it has to resonate with those communities. We need to meet those Hispanics where they are in terms of like their economic status, where they live, what their journey is, and just make sure that we are conscious of the subcultures of the Hispanic population if we really want to drive adoption. Just one size fits all is really not going to work for the Hispanic population. So just to summarize, I have been thrilled to really get to share this and be with you today. And I'm looking forward to forming a coalition of many of us really making all of these things operational and making a dent so the Hispanic gap turns into a Hispanic leadership opportunity. Thank you, and hope you have a great summit.
Hello, I'm Gary Acosta, co-founder and CEO of the National Association of Hispanic Real Estate Professionals, and I'm delighted to be here and be part of the Hispanic Promise Summit. I want to tell you a little bit about our organization and some of the data points that we've learned over the years. NARP is a purpose-driven organization made up of real estate practitioners from across the country that serve Hispanic home buyers and sellers. Our mission is to advance sustainable Hispanic homeownership. We believe in homeownership because it provides a stable environment for growth, and Latinos are a very, very family-centric demographic, and homeownership is core to the American dream. We accomplish our mission statement by educating and empowering the real estate practitioners who serve Hispanic homebuyers and sellers, by advocating for public policy that supports our mission statement, and by facilitating relationships amongst industry stakeholders, real estate practitioners, and the entire housing industry ecosystem. Our organization is structured as a 501c6 trade association. We were founded in 2000. We have over 40,000 members, mostly real estate agents and brokers, but other members of the housing ecosystem, including mortgage bankers, builders, and settlement service providers. We have 80 local chapters across the country and moving very quickly to 100. And we organize 400 local market events every year, mostly about educating the real estate community about the nuances in serving Hispanic home buyers and sellers effectively. Our organization produces 2 reports a year, and our marquee report is our State of Hispanic Home Ownership Report, where we track home ownership trends within the Latino demographic. One of the things that we track is what percentage of growth that is coming in the housing sector overall is coming from Latinos. And over the last 10 years, 51.6% of all growth has come from the Latino sector. The current homeownership rate for Latinos in this country is 47.5% and is trending towards 50% very quickly. This trails the national average of high 60, 68% for the entire population in the United States. But there's a good reason for that. Latinos are the youngest demographic and are just entering those prime home buying years, and we expect that gap to shrink over the coming years. When we think of the housing sector, I don't think most people recognize of what a huge percentage of GDP comes from housing in this country. About 16% of US GDP is related to the housing sector. And we look over the last 18 years, we can see that housing has doubled in size as it pertains to the GDP report. But within that, the Latino sector has tripled during that period of time. So you can make the case that not only are Latinos driving home ownership and housing in this country, but by extension, driving growth in US GDP. All of the economic indicators tell us that Latinos are going to continue to play an important role in the housing industry, especially as we come out of this pandemic. Latinos have the largest and highest labor force participation of any other demographic in the country. And we represent about 40% of all new households being formed nationwide. So if you look at the credit profiles, income trends, and a strong, passionate desire for home ownership, it makes the case that Latinos not only are going to be strong in the near future, but for the foreseeable future in this country as it pertains to home ownership acquisition. And as I said before, Latinos are young. Our median age are 29.5 years, and a full 1 in 3 Latinos in this country are under the age of 18. So the data points that give us an indication of whether or not you're going to be in a position to buy a home in the coming years, credit scores, income, wealth, all of those things improve and get larger over time as you age. So we can be pretty sure that Latinos are going to continue to be a force in homeownership in the coming years. Again, more information about the demographic, not just of the Latinos at large, but who are buying the homes in this country. So the average age of a Latino home buyer was 40 years last year. The majority of those Latinos are US born. Their median income was almost $70,000 per household. And they are twice as likely to live in multi-generational homes. Another thing we look at is where is the growth coming from? Where geographically are Latinos buying homes? But 10 years ago, I would have said California, Texas, Florida represent the large majority of growth in the Latino demographic, both in terms of population and in terms of home ownership. But that's changing. We're seeing some of the biggest growth coming in non-traditional markets in Arizona, the Midwest, and the South. So Latinos are moving to where there's affordable housing, and they're moving to where there are jobs. I want to close by thanking you for giving me the opportunity to participate in this summit and reminding the employers that Latinos are some of the most aspirational people that you have within your workforce. Latino immigrants come to this country for economic opportunity. And because family is so core to who we are in terms of our personality and our value system, homeownership is going to be at the center of our aspirations. So keep that in mind. Your Latino employees are going to be some of the most loyal that you have, and they're going to be some of the most aspirational and optimistic that you have within your entire workforce. And homeownership is going to be one of the cornerstones of the American dream for them and their families now and moving forward. So thank you. Congratulations on this event. It's an honor to be part of the Hispanic Promise Summit and to be a partner for this great event.